The enslaved people of America awoke on dirt floors as the sun rose on the plantations, knowing that they had only hard work until dusk ahead of them. This was one of the many stomach-churning events that took place on slave breeding farms. The distressing stories of slavery will leave you feeling grateful for what you have today. With that, don't forget to like the video in support of this educational content. Also, go ahead and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss another update from us. There is no amount of gratitude that can compensate for the sacrifices the slaves made over a century ago. How did the slaves muster the courage to handle the cruelty? Can you imagine the psychological effects of the brutality on them? Well, let's find out what happened on these slave breeding grounds. In a cruel and expensive series of events, the European West turned its back on America and continued to engage in the slave trade. America protected its slave stock when it became illegal to trade in slaves along the coasts of Africa, so it bred slaves to fill its own domestic market. The future that lay before the American slave population was one of stolen autonomy, bodies, children, youths, and futures, a shame history can hardly look at. As we look at the practice of breeding slaves, we address many unanswered questions, starting with, what are farms used for? Possibly the darkest part of slavery was the breeding farms. The United States was in no position to alter its course, as the rest of the world became aware of the inhumanity of slavery, which should be stated for both economic and humanitarian reasons. In the late 1800s, the United States relied on roughly 1.5 million enslaved people for its economic prosperity. The country's exports, such as tobacco, cotton, rice, and sugar, were all produced using slave labor. Since the international slave trade was widely condemned, plantation owners in the U.S. found a new way to maintain their valuable resource by breeding their own slaves from birth. The antebellum economy was sustained by an internal slave market, which led to a significant increase in the number of enslaved individuals. In just a period of 40 years, the estimated number of slaves in the U.S. grew almost 4 times, from 1.5 million to about 4 million. The largest breeding facilities were located in Richmond, Virginia, and Maryland, and were used to maintain the slave population in the Deep South. Let's look at what caused this exactly. The domestic breeding of slaves in the United States was a result of legal repercussions. Along with other Christian organizations, William Wilberforce led an abolitionist assault on the British Parliament. The Slave Trade Act was passed by the British Parliament in 1807, effectively ending the Atlantic slave trade. At the time, the United States was experiencing an unprecedented expansion of its agricultural sector. The invention of the cotton gin raised the level of cotton production, the nation continued to expand into the West, and the production of rice and sugar cane showed no signs of slowing down. Let's now move on to a darker truth that remains veiled owing to its harsh nature. Considering their breeding period, or young age, slave women were carefully selected. These young women practically started getting pregnant when they were kids. There would be stories about a 22-year-old woman who had given birth to 7 children, or a 19-year-old woman who had 4 children. Their lives were reduced to little more than being raped, going through a difficult pregnancy, giving birth in a field, and then being told they would get pregnant again in 2 to 3 months. The breeding women of the antebellum era endured humiliations our history books hardly dare to mention. They were stripped of their bodies, stripped of their children, stripped of their lives. Not just that, there were numerous horror stories from the antebellum period based on overseers who were frequently employed on larger plantations. The overseer's job was to get as much work as possible out of the slaves who worked the fields because this was what they would be paid for. Overseers would use almost any method they thought necessary to maintain the work rates of slaves, further deepening the corridors of cruelty. As a result, the reputation of overseers who were nasty and cruel, frequently inebriated, and prone to horrifyingly violent outbursts toward their workforce was born. Maximum productivity would be desired by the master or the landowner in order to consistently maintain profits and to keep his or her employees happy. How? One can only wonder. How could a group of slaves who were forced to work long hours and were only given enough food to survive ever be considered a contented workforce? How could they possibly want to work harder when their autonomy and identity were being denied? The quality of the overseers themselves would vary on a professional and a personal level. This is a stark reminder of being grateful for who we are and what we have today. No amount of gratitude can equate to the sacrifices the slaves made for us. With that, let's continue doing our best to be thankful. Share this among people in your circle to improve awareness, and also like the video and subscribe to our channel to show some support. Until next time, stay aware and stay thankful.